Greetings and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to be doing some digital quilting on the dog park block of the month. We started this about 10 months ago. I believe there's 10 blocks in this series. And this is from a kit. The kit comes in a really beautifully packaged cardboard box. It has the color front cover on there. It also had all of the laser cut and pre-fused applique components for each of the blocks. So just as you see it on the cover, that was the applique that was included in the packaging. The pieces are all just peel, place, and press, and we went over each month of assembling those and then putting the whole top together. So I have that loaded on the machine. I'm going to do a short clip on the computer just to do a recap of how I selected the design for this particular quilt, and then we can go ahead and break away from there right to the IQ and the Bernina Q24, which is what we're going to use today to actually quilt this top. So I have the fabric loaded on the back. The fabric I chose is also a type of newsprint fabric that went with the theme of the dog park, since dogs are often potty trained on newsprint. So that was the whole theme that we carried through with the background blocks, the border, and now the backing. I'm going to be using an isocord thread in both the top and bobbin. Bobbin. So it would be both top and bottom of the quilt. The back of the quilt is more cream colored, so I used a cream colored thread there, and on the top it's a very light gray. The value is the same for the two, the light gray and the cream, believe it or not, and so I don't think I'm going to have any major adjustments with my tension. So I'm going to go ahead and do the clip for the computer section using the design wall on urbanaelements.com to select the quilting design and see what it looks like, and then we'll get over to the machine and show you how we lay out the quilt on the IQ program and get it stitching. We are at the Urban Elements website. I have already logged on to protect my email information. We are going to work on the design wall to select the Malachite design for the dog park quilt. So we'll go first to design wall. There are instructions here. There's also a separate video on the use of this website feature. First, we're going to select browse, and this is going to open up my files, my photo documents. So I'm going to upload a picture of the dog park quilt. Now that I've uploaded it on the browse button, I can use the upload image to add it to the canvas. If you try and use the upload image first, since there wasn't anything there, it's going to give you an error message. So we browse first to select. We have the image here now. We're going to upload it to our canvas. And you see the image of the dog park top on my design wall. And I already know that I'm using Malachite. So I'm just going to type in Malachite. Or close to it. I'm going to select it. You can see from here down in the bottom right hand corner we can select design wall. That's going to save an image of this on our design wall. It's just appeared here, and if you want all of the designs to be a specific thread color, you could select that now by clicking anywhere in the spectrum and then on the value range, and it will give you that color. So I could do purple, but I also could do like a black color. So I'm just going to leave it at that because it's easier to see on my particular quilt. Go up here and click Add to Canvas. you can see when you click on the design on the canvas, there's a real light blue box that allows you to increase or decrease the size of the design. There's also a box up here that would allow you to rotate it. I know it's a little bit hard to see on my particular quilt, but that is a possibility also. So I'm going to go ahead and move it back to well, I'm just going to drag that one off. I can't get it to spin back because I can't see it. But I'm going to add another one to the quilt. And you could just keep adding to the canvas until you get the entire top loaded. So you can see exactly what this pattern would look like. There, down here. It's not going to add the design at the same place each time. So that's one thing you have to look at, where it gets added. But it's pretty easy to just keep popping these in and seeing if you like the design. You could do the whole quilt after you do it. You could save it to your computer. You could post it on Facebook or on Pinterest. You could share it with somebody by email. But this is just how you can see what designs look like on your actual quilt before you actually quilt it out. You could go ahead and delete these here, but you could also add it to your shopping cart and then go ahead and purchase this design if it happens to be one you like. So this is just a quick run through of the design wall, and we'll get back to the studio and get this quilt quilted up. The IQ always starts, it always wants to be brought to the center of the front of the frame. So that's where it generally is, more or less. It's off a couple inches. But that's how the program starts each day. So I have it in manual mode. I'm going to go ahead and finish that. It's engaging the motors. And I'm going to go ahead and select Design So Quilt. But when I do that, I'm going to go back to my starting point, which is going to be in the upper left-hand corner. That's just so that when the IQ is formatting itself for the size of the quilt, it knows where its starting point is. I don't want to format it while it's here and let it believe that this is the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to move it now so I don't get confused and forget to do it later. That way I know that we are at the correct starting point before I even start designing the quilt. And later when I get to the bottom, I'll try and show you a mistake that I've been making and the steps I need to take to correct that. So I'm going to go ahead and move the camera a little bit and then we'll get started. I measured this quilt before I put it on, but I was just refreshing my memory. So I can go ahead, I'm in the upper left-hand corner. I know at some point it has to be back at this point, and so I'm just moving it there now to get to that point faster. I'm going to hit Design So Quilt and start new. It's always going to ask me 3 questions, and the answer for me is always yes. I have a work in progress. Do I want to replace it? Yes. Am I sure? Yes. And do I want to reset my time? Yes. Some people like to keep track of their time, how long it took to quilt something out. So this is a nice feature on the IQ. We're going to use a pantograph, and I'm going to enter the rectangle manually because the whole quilt isn't available on the top of the surface here, so it wouldn't be able to measure all the way down to the bottom. So it's easier to enter rectangle manually. And it's 48 by 58, so I'm going to go ahead and hit 4/8 enter. That's the width. The height is going to be 5/8 enter. And now we have that done. We'll hit continue. And you can see my rectangle just that quick. Hit finished. And I know that I'm going to be using Malachite on here from Elementz. The reason is because I think in this case it will look like little puddles. You can use your imagination. So I'm going to go down to Elementz on my selection. I know it's called Malachite, so I can skip right to M. And right here it is. You always have to select both even and odd rows, which I always find odd. I'm sure there's some quilting pattern out there that may be a reverse image of itself or something, some reason why you would need two different ones. Haven't found it yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit continue for both the even and odd rows. This one came up pretty good. You can see that there's just a tiny gap in between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rows of quilting. So we can see this isn't going to take too long to quilt. But I'm going to go ahead and hit gap and reduce that gap even more. And I can just drag with my stylus or my finger and get that so that it's interlocking in a way that you can't even see that. So I'm going to go ahead and now hit my row height, and I want that to be somewhere around it. Right now this pattern height is 12.37, but I know it's 10.75. I know that because I looked on the Urban Elements website. So I could adjust that a little bit more, but I'm fine with that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finished. And now it's asking me for my transition type. Continuous is the only option here, so I'm accepting that. And now I want to go ahead and hit sew quilt. I'm going to use Panto sequencing assistance so that it can help me set up the whole quilt at once. Selecting the first pattern. That's my first row that you could see. I'm going to hit continue. Panto sequencing assist again, and I can go ahead and finish the rest of the rows. How do I want the rows to quilt? Left to right or alternating? I kind of like alternating because then I can start on each side. It's just a personal choice. So I'm going to hit alternating. I'm going to tie off at the ends, and I'm going to do the whole quilt all at once. And you can see that my start points are green, the end points are red. So if we just count the red ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows we have to finish this out. I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt. So it's asking me to set the regulated stitch length. So I'm going to go ahead and hit manual on my Bernina Q24. So now the IQ is operating the stitching on the Bernina, and I hit continue, and it's going to ask me to pull up the bobbin thread, and it already took one stitch, so I have my 2 threads, which would be both the top and the bobbin thread, up to the side. I'm going to move my tape measure off, and I will say that I did put on my little scoop foot rather than my ruler foot, just to make sure it doesn't in any way pick up any of the applique off of the quilt. And I can go ahead and hit start. And just that quick, I have an obstruction. So I'm going to go ahead and check and see if anything's actually in the way, or if it was just an error, and then we'll start again. When I got my obstruction notice, I checked the back of the machine to make sure there wasn't anything in the way of the machine. I went ahead and checked the front. When I looked, the thread was broken on the front of the machine, and as I was pulling the thread to rethread it, the needle, the foot was down, and I was still able to freely pull the thread. So to me that indicated that when I threaded the machine, I did not catch the thread in the top tension discs. So I've rethreaded that just to see if that corrects the problem. And I'm going to go ahead, I've pulled the thread up again, and I'm going to go ahead and restart. So it looks like that was the problem. I'm going to go ahead and let this sew out for a while. Once we get more of the stitching completed, I'll pull the camera in and let you see what the design looks like as it's being sewn out. I will tell you in advance, because the thread is a really light gray and the overall value of the background is even darker than that, the quilting thread is not going to show up as a high contrast design. At one point I thought about using either the green, the purple, or the orange that are in the applique, but I felt like that would be just a little too busy. One of the options also could have been to use a clear poly monofilament. That's just a little bit harder for me to see. I do, when I'm threading the machine, use magic marker on the very end of it and let that dry so I can see to thread the needle. But I like working with isocord, personal preference, and so I'm going to go ahead and let this sew out, and I'll pull you in, let you see what that looks like in just a bit. We're successfully at the end of our first row, so we only have 5 rows left to go. And I will say also that this quilt, 48 by 58, the original time for the completion of the quilt was 51 minutes. That is how long the IQ will actually be stitching, so with me rolling up the quilt in between the 5 rows, it will add a little bit of time to that. But it shows you how quickly you can get something done using the long arm machine and the robotics, in this case the IntelliQuilter. Also, you saw me load the information in real time, so you can see that it only took probably 2 minutes, 3 minutes to get all of the information for the quilt loaded, the pattern, get it adjusted, so it was very quickly and intuitive to use. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull up the thread and get ready to move the machine so that I could roll up the quilt and get that second row started. Now, up here on the screen you can see that I have the red, which is what I just finished sewing. That was the top Malachite pattern. The bottom green here is the area that has yet to be sewn. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to put the needle down in the highest point of the Malachite pattern that has yet to sew out. So I'm just going to choose one on the screen and drop my needle. And at this point I'm going to go ahead and release the tension on the 2 rails, the top and bottom, and also I have the top under tension. On the Bernina Q24, whenever you bring this rail up, there's a bar that hits the release button, so it releases the tension on this automatically. So I'm going to lightly go ahead and release the tension on the bottom rail, do the same on the top. I'm going to advance the quilt past the part that we've sewn. I know the needle's in the position of the highest piece, so I can take that back as far as I need to where the head is still moving, so I'm not actually hitting the back of the take-up lever with the back of the machine. And I can go ahead and put the top and bottom back into tension. Make sure that the batting is nice and flat. Go ahead and bring down this bottom lever so that that's back in tension. Go ahead and lock that up. At this point, I'm just smoothing out the quilt, making sure there's no lint. My next step, I'm going to pull up the needle out of the quilt, and I'm going to baste the 2 sides of the quilt. So I'll pull up the thread, okay, I've readjusted my program so it knew where I had finished sewing, and now I'm at my start 2 point. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. That's going to start sewing the second row of Malachite, and at this point I can bring you in a little bit closer and show you what some of the stitching looks like. So the point of being back screen, at this point we're back behind the frame. I wanted to show you that from here you could see what my bobbin thread looks like on the back, and just as it is in the front, it's almost invisible. It would be hard to even see any quilting on here because I've used a low contrast and I've matched it as closely as possible to the backing. The other thing you can see is the X motor on the back underneath the quilt. The X motor moves the carriage side to side. We have the Y motor here. The Y motor moves the quilt machine forward and backwards. These two work in perfect symmetry. The noises that you hear are the signals being sent to the X and Y motors, so it's almost like a little musical symphony. So there's no cable or track that the machine is moving on. It's simply moving with those two motors engaging with the track itself. So I'm going to go ahead. I think I'm on my fourth row. 1, 2, 3. This is the fourth row now of stitch out, so I only have 2 rows left. I just wanted to show you the back of the machine, show you what it looks like from the back, and we'll go ahead and get to the front and do our last 2 rows. Here's a little bit of a side view while I was moving around. Maybe this would help fill in some questions for some of you. One of the hardest parts of filming sometimes is getting the lighting right, so I have a variety of lights that I use to try and eliminate the quilt surface so it picks up the video the best. I have shown this before, but I think it's really cool. On the screen of the IQ, it has the whole quilting pattern, and the pattern in red is where the machine has already stitched out, and the design in green is where you're going to be stitching, and the crosshair on the screen is exactly the needle position. So you can follow the quilting design and see it change from green to red as it's quilted out. At this point, I'm at the bottom of the quilt. I still have a row and a half left to sew out. I'm going to go ahead. I can see by moving the machine that I can base the full bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and base my 2 sides and remove the top leader from the quilt, remove the pins. So these 3 sides are all basted. Then I can go ahead and realign the quilt and re-snap the bottom to make sure the size is correct. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the pins and get that ready to base. This is a point where I've made mistakes every time I have done a quilt so far. What I do is I want to realign where I'm supposed to be at when I get to a new row, but before I do that I adjust the overall size. So I adjust the overall size when it thinks it's rolled up or hasn't been rolled up yet. And I reduce a part of the quilt, and then when I realign it to its new starting point, I have chopped off more of the quilt than I intended to. So the first thing I have to do, I've rolled up the quilt to start my row 5. I have to go ahead and let the program know that I've done that first before I can reduce the length of the quilt. So I have to touch a reference point on the screen, which is going to be at the bottom of row 5 there. That way it knows where I'm starting at. And I've already moved the needle position to there, so I can go ahead and hit OK. And now it knows where my start 5 position is. So I've done a couple stitches there so I can find that. But now I'm going to adjust. And what I want to do is move the needle down to the actual bottom of the quilt. And as you can see, it doesn't actually need adjusted. So I'm going to be able to do these 2 rows without rolling up the quilt. So I can go ahead and move back to my start 5 position. But the reason this was important, and the reason I'm trying to relearn it, is if the program had thought the quilt was much longer, I could have adjusted it here. But if I had done that first and then realigned it, it would have chopped off more than what I needed. So now I can go ahead and move back to start 5. I can hit finish because I didn't have to make any adjustment, and hit start. Now I will show this again on one of the other quilts, and I'll intentionally make it way too big so that I can drive this point home on the mistake that I've been making, both to show you but also for me to relearn the mistake. As I've said, I've only been using the IQ for a few months now, and so I'm learning some things as we go also. I just got an obstruction notice. It looks like the thread is caught through the foot. I may not have trimmed the thread properly. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up and get restarted. I just finished row 5. Row 6 is just going to be a small partial row. All I have to do really is pull the needle up so it doesn't get caught and hit start. It's automatically going to come down to my row 6 starting position. And this last row is really only about 4 inches. It says we have 4.6 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the start button and just move one of my lights out of the way of the machine so we don't get an obstruction notice. But this is going to sew out pretty quickly, 4 minutes and counting. You can see this is really by coincidence. I put in 58 inches and when I set up the quilt to begin with, and we really are at 58 inches. So that worked out pretty good. I've already cut off the bottom piece of batting. It's not in the way, so you can see both the backing, the batting layer, and the top. And I managed to get all the way to the middle of row 5 before I needed to change the bobbin and refill it. So that went pretty smoothly. And I'm just going to go ahead and let this sew out and let you see the completion of the quilt. Well, here you have it. We have a finished dog park quilt. We used the newsprint or newspaper theme to carry all the way through the block of the month. We have a lighter shade of a newsprint for the background of each block. We used a little bit darker on the border, and then also on the backing we also have the newsprint theme. The thread was low contrast on both the bobbin thread and the top thread. They were equal weight isocord threads. It was kind of a creamy color for the back, and I used a real light gray for the front. So for that reason, the quilting doesn't show up real strong on here, but I think you do get a really good sense of texture. We used Malachite quilting pattern, so that kind of reminded me on this particular quilt of puddles, little puddles that a puppy might make on a newsprint. So all I have left to do is put the binding on and a sleeve, and then I can get that hung up. That won't be today. I seem to have a stack of quilts that I need to get bindings on. Either get them on or get them sewn down. So I'll add that to my very long list of things to do as we continue to try and provide you a free video every week. The videos usually post Saturday morning at 9. If you like the videos, you could go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. The YouTube channel is Urban Elements. And we want to thank Urban Elements for giving us the opportunity to present these videos to you. I think we are somewhere getting close to 100 videos at this point. And we're really thankful for those loyal followers that continue to watch and comment and enjoy the videos. And until next time, keep quilting.